Alex here with a Perspectives video on understanding families. Donna Wilburn, a licensed marriage and family therapist with Red Rock Counseling, is going to be interviewing hearing master Amy Mastin, who is running for Department M of the 8th Judicial District Court. Let's take a look.
So thank you for coming in and talking to me. I appreciate it so much. So what I'm doing is I'm a marriage and family therapist in town, and I've recognized that even though I work in a lot of court cases, I didn't know a lot about the judges and the candidates. And I was like, I'm supposed to vote for someone who has our child's, lives in their hands. I think I should know more. So then that's why I'm doing this, is so me as well as other people can learn more about the candidates and be more informed as voters. Okay. So maybe introduce yourself, what position you're running for, maybe a little bit about how you got to this point.
First of all, thank you. I appreciate that you're providing this service. Particularly now, it's been really difficult. We don't have the traditional avenues of campaigning, and therefore our ability to get our message out is a little bit more limited.
Oh, right.
So this is a great opportunity. I'm Amy Mastin. I'm running for Family Court Department M. I have been a practicing attorney for 23 years now. The entirety of my career has been focused on family law and family court issues.
Right. How long have you been practicing? 23
years.
Oh, that's a long time.
It feels like a long time some days. But my focus on family law and family court issues has been strictly by design. That's how I wanted it. It's where my passion is. It's all I've ever really cared about. I wanted to be invested in what I did when I became an attorney. And when I moved here, I started working for a family court judge as his law clerk. And learning his job and learning more about family court only made me more passionate about wanting to focus my practice there. I was in private practice. I worked for the DA's office doing dependency, child abuse and neglect cases.
I find a lot of people do that. Is that part of learning as you go, is doing some time in that, child welfare CPS, those kind of things?
Well, I think that's interesting that you say you find a lot of people do that, because it's really a limited niche area. And so maybe there's a correlation between doing that work and wanting to be a judicial officer.
Yeah, it's because a lot of the candidates have spent time doing that. And so I was like, does everybody do that?
I think it just motivates you or creates a drive in you to want to be an even bigger part of a solution to a devastating problem in our community. So maybe that's the connection, but there's really not a lot of people who practice in that area. It's limited.
Right.
It's one of the smallest areas, one of the smallest divisions in the district attorney's office.
Okay. Do you have to learn about child issues or certain things because you're making decisions for children? So Does it require certain kind of different classes than somebody who's not doing that?
So much of our education, when you're working in that area of the district attorney's office, so much of the education focuses on psychological needs of children, understanding the psychology of abusive parents. Because we're doing the civil side of those cases, not the criminal side. We're not prosecuting parents and putting them in jail. We're working on reunifying children who have been abused by their parents. So we're part of the assessment process looking at when it's safe to return children to those parents. So there's a lot of psychology involved in it.
So even working in that department and working with those families, just all that experience really will play a part in the family court judicial position.
Of course. Yeah, I do think, again, I think it motivates you to want to be part of. What I loved about that job was being a part of a solution to a societal problem, part of a solution to a child's tragedy on a individual level.
You're changing their whole future. You're affecting their whole future.
Ideally. I sat as a pro tem, so a substitute judge in those cases. And so that's where some of my judicial experience came from. And then for the past 6.5 years, I worked as a hearing master, and we can talk about what that means, presiding over domestic violence cases.
Oh, really? So you have awareness in that area.
and a tremendous amount of education in that area as well.
Wow.
I very recently, just in the past 2 weeks, was transferred from that department to child support. So now I'm working on child support enforcement cases, which is another high conflict area.
Right.
But again, I do that because I want to. It's not for everybody. I recognize that. People will say, how can you do that when you talk about child abuse cases? I do it because I love it. I can't imagine doing anything else.
Right. I hear that a lot too, because I work with mostly the high conflict divorces, not, just child issues. I do
Right.
have a focus on helping kids with anxiety and ADD and their own little overcoming trauma. But a lot of my cases are high conflict, and I hear the same thing from people like,
Right.
how could you work with that crowd?
Right. Or the
Why?
court. Why would you want to be involved in cases
Yeah.
that are in court? Because that's a whole nother element that makes it unpleasant from the perception of other people. But it's being a part of the solution and making something turn out the way it's supposed to, or in a child's best interest or everybody's best interest to the best of your ability.
I like that phrase, being a part of the solution.
Yeah.
Not keeping the fight going or making a living. It's
Right.
being part of the solution for the kids and the
Absolutely.
families, which in effect is for the whole community and the world, is part of the solution for them while they're young. Means it's going to be part of a good thing
lifelong.
when they get older. Yeah.
Absolutely. Even as an attorney, our jobs are advocates, right? But it doesn't necessarily have to be adversarial at the advocacy level. As an attorney, I saw my job as reaching a conclusion as quickly as possible, fighting over the things that had to be fought over, not fighting over the things that didn't have to be fought over because they're black and white under the law, or the outcome was clear in this specific case, and minimizing the damage to this family by limiting the amount of time they stayed involved in the court system.
Right.
I think as a judicial officer, my attitude towards a case would be exactly the same.
Yeah, I like that idea too, minimizing the time that they're just spinning their wheels in there, and the kids are part of that.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing I've noticed is not everybody knows what high conflict is. They go in there like divorce is divorce, and that's how it is. So when you have a case come across in front of you, how do you determine if it's a high conflict case, and how would you even treat that case differently if it was different than the typical cooperative parenting divorce?
Well, I think high conflict cases unfortunately show themselves pretty quickly, right? I don't think they're a mystery. The thing about at least one party to a high conflict case is that they're self-righteous to an extent, and
you see ego in there?
Yeah. And they make their position well known. People become entrenched very quickly, and once you see that person dig their heels in and they don't have an idea that there's any other possible outcome to a case, then you know what you're dealing with, and you have to approach that as a case that's going to be a little bit more difficult.
So your radar's detecting really early on. You're like, okay, this one's going to need a little bit different.
Right.
So what would you do different with a high conflict case versus a just average Joe case?
Well, from the perspective of a judicial officer, I think you have to immediately take a little bit more control over the case. I think in a perfect divorce case, a judicial officer's job is to give the parties as much control over the outcome as possible.
Right.
You want to empower them. They're going to live this life for the rest of their lives. They know what's best for their children. All of those things you recognize as a judicial officer, right? But when you get the idea that this is a high conflict case, either because both parties are entrenched in this ongoing battle, or one party doesn't know how to see outside of their narrow view,
kind of
right?
thing. Right.
Then I think you have no choice but to take a little bit more control over what's happening in the case. And
So you're saying like you're going to have to realize you're going to be a bit more firm with this crowd than you would be with another crowd.
more firm, probably stay a little bit more involved than you would in other cases, and just sort of monitor the progression. To the extent that it's necessary. Still never insert yourself where you're not needed or wanted.
Right.
But, especially when we're talking about one party who is the problem, you want to make sure that other party is protected to an extent.
Right.
And when there's a child involved, that helps protect the child from the conflict also.
So as you're talking in this field, it's called we need strong boundaries.
Yeah.
You need to have strong boundaries when working with this crowd.
Yeah, got it.
Versus like another client who you're, relaxed and listening and
Mm-hmm.
you can just like take it easy. But with this high conflict crowd. And so as you're talking, I'm like, that's good that she recognizes you need to be stronger with this crowd than someone else. You can't be all nervous and not make a decision because you don't want to offend somebody.
Right, absolutely. And that's another big thing. Just, they need to understand the court's going to be the one that's controlling what's happening here. They're not going to be allowed to hijack the case and determine the outcome of the case by their actions or their misbehavior. And it does take, I think, a strong judicial officer
So
to
let's say in the
recognize and do
courtroom
that.
with this crowd that gets so dramatic and emotional
Mm-hmm.
and intense, you have no qualms about being strong and make sure you're managing who's in your courtroom.
Absolutely, but also by the same token, making sure that all the emotion that can be removed from the situation is removed from the situation. Making sure that I'm asserting myself as an authority figure, not as somebody who's emotionally involved in the outcome.
Right.
I think that's a real danger too. If they perceive you as being emotionally connected to the other party, and that's why you're acting the way you're acting, all you're doing is creating a bigger, alienating that person even more and creating less likelihood that they're going to follow your directives.
Right. So and that's
still
important.
maintaining neutrality.
And as you said, you did pro tem and hearing master. Have you had come across times where you had to firm and strong, not emotional?
Yeah, all the time. So hearing master, I feel compelled to say it because I used to think people knew what that meant and they don't.
Mm-hmm.
So a hearing master is a court-appointed judicial officer, as opposed to an elected judge, which is the position I'm running for. I was appointed by the district court judges to fulfill this position. And so I have my own courtroom, I have my own caseload. The only difference is my cases are appealed, so to speak, to a district court. If somebody doesn't like the outcome of my case, they go to the district court, as opposed to appealing to an appellate court or a Nevada Supreme Court. It's easier to say, I don't like what she did, okay? So I have to be even more careful with my decision.
Like,
absolutely.
If you make an order, it still counts as an order.
It is the order the minute that my order leaves my desk and goes to their hands. Absolutely.
And they have to follow it like every other court.
They are bound to follow it. My written decision tells them they have to follow it until they get a different order from a district court judge. So it's absolutely an order, an enforceable order. But in the case of domestic violence orders, something that I would say all the time, and that I think people who haven't done this job don't appreciate, other candidates might not appreciate. Being in that role is very nuanced. Some of what we're talking about is really a matter of having the experience with these personalities in court and picking up on when you have to be that authority figure, when you have to show some gentle caring towards a perpetrator of domestic violence.
Right. You can't like hate them.
You can't. You can't shame them.
Right.
You need buy-in from them. And sometimes that buy-in means that you have to be incredibly empathetic towards that person. And you have to, at the same time, somehow encourage the other party, the victim of domestic violence, to understand what you're doing. By being empathetic towards the perpetrator of domestic violence.
Right.
And getting all of that going in the courtroom. It's such a dance.
It takes, to me, it sounds like you have to be aware of a lot of different things.
Always.
Different dynamics, personalities, and all that.
Always.
So let me ask, because I'm a therapist, kind of representing therapists out there, and we work with children and families, so we want to know who we vote for, like, has a similar understanding or at least an appreciation for therapists. Like, how do you think therapists can help you in the courtroom? When would you incorporate a therapist's point of view?
I think they're so underutilized. It's frustrating to me. As a practitioner, I felt like they were underutilized. Underutilized just as in their function as therapists. I wish more families would see the benefit of family therapists. I've used them in my personal family. It's critical.
Right.
Anytime a family is going through something like a divorce, I don't frankly understand why they wouldn't see the benefit to using a neutral person to help negotiate the impact this has, understand better the impact this has on their children and what they can do better as parents. So I think it's just an underutilized resource in general.
So for solutions and for information.
Absolutely.
Okay.
From the court perspective, what I would like to see happen more often is for therapists to be used in these high conflict divorce cases to rebut this presumption that joint physical custody is in a child's best interest.
Like all the time. Because that's the thing
it's
right
not.
now. It's all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know that other states don't have that legal presumption.
Ah,
It's an exception, not a rule, to have that legal presumption.
really?
And I completely value and appreciate that both parents need to have a substantial and meaningful role in a child's life, and all things being equal, they should have joint physical custody of their children. But when things are not equal, all you're doing is harming that child by forcing this joint physical custody arrangement, and the law allows for there to be an alternative to that joint physical custody arrangement, and that's when therapists should be used. That's when a therapist should be able to come in and say, I've spent time with this family and this is not in the child's best interest, and I'm going to tell you why.
Okay, and that makes a lot of sense because you have one view and a therapist has another view. You think the more information you have to make a decision, the better.
Of course.
So let
better.
me ask you. So I don't know if you, like how many people are running with you for this position, but for a voter, what makes you different or the best candidate for that role?
So I have 3 opponents. There is no incumbent for my race.
Okay, is this a new one?
No, the incumbent judge did not run for re-election.
Okay.
He's retired.
Okay.
And so 3 opponents. I have a primary election that's important because 2 of us are going to make it out of the primary and run for the general election. So I need to at least be in the top 2. I think I bring experience. I know I bring experience that none of the other 3 candidates bring. None of the other 3 have sat as a hearing officer for the past 6.5 years.
None of them.
No.
Neither of the 3 has done this. Be appointed already as a judge.
No, absolutely not. No. I have 10 years more experience than at least one of my opponents. 2 of my opponents, one of whom has practiced half the time that I've practiced, have written ethics complaints against them. And I've never had an ethical complaint in spite of practicing family law, which is notorious for dissatisfied clients, right?
Yeah, I've seen that.
Never had an ethical complaint filed against me. I know what I'm doing up there. I know family law after practicing in private practice more than 10 years, family law, and I know what I'm doing as a judicial officer.
So it sounds like experience. That's what you're bringing.
Experience and integrity. I think those are my 2 primary qualities.
So let's say if somebody wants to learn more about you or contact you and get to know maybe how you think about certain things, how would they get in touch with you?
So my website is www.mastin, which is MASTIN, 4judge.com.
Okay.
And my website contains personal information about me, obviously my experience, my professional history, but also why I chose this path for my career, and personal mentoring decisions or mentors in my life that have led me to some of the decisions that I've made.
Wow.
I also talk about 5 specific cases that have helped shape my career, and I think that offers some insight into how personally I take what I do and how important it is.
It sounds like you really have a mission.
I do.
This is not just a fun thing or I want to try being a judge because it looks fun. This is like a mission you're on to, like you said, for solutions to the problems that families
I've done it for 6.5 years. It's not a fun job.
So it's not for the fun either.
It is
glamour?
It is hard work. It is incredibly hard work, but so rewarding. And again, it's about making a difference.
When is the vote for the primary?
It's now.
So right now, and a lot of people have absentee ballots or the ballots they
all the ballots are mail-in.
Okay.
There's no such thing as voting in person for the same reason that we're sitting across this wide table. All it is mail-in votes. You should all have your ballots now. You fill out each bubble, put it in the envelope, mail it in. It's got to be mailed by June 9th. It can be turned in person as well. And the ballot came with a list of polling places where you can turn it in person, but that's the only option.
Okay, so just to be clear, no voting in person. You just have your ballot. You can mail it in or drop it off, and it has to be in by June 9th. So
Right.
let's get the primaries going. Let's narrow this down and see who we really want in there.
Absolutely.
And I'm hoping this will go well. So it sounds like, gosh, that experience, I can't even imagine someone without experience going into working with high conflict cases. And even as a therapist, like, we're supposed to be trained in this and we have no clue sometimes.
Right, exactly.
That this is what we're working with, and we're triangulated into the drama of
Absolutely.
this whole problem.
Right, and it definitely helps to know who's up there on the bench, and you get hours of clinical experience before you are ever set out there to work with these families.
Correct.
And having the experience from the bench makes all the difference.
I get it and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to talk about it.
I want to thank you for coming in and talking. Sometimes it takes a little courage. Some people get a little anxious about like how this is going to go, but I think it's so important. I value the mission that you're on, so I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Donna.
coming in.
I appreciate it.